Shabbat Shalom. In this week's Parsha, Parshat Tzvi, the Torah describes the big day Kohuna, the special garments that the priests wore. There were one set of garments for ordinary priests and for the high priest as well on most occasions. Then there was a special set of 8 garments which the high priest wore on special occasions, especially on Kippur. And one of the differences between the garments of the ordinary priests and the high priest was the headgear. The headgear of the high priest is called mitznefet, and the headgear of the ordinary priests are called mikbat. Now, in many of the fanciful illustrations one can find in all sorts of books and on the internet, there's not any essential difference between the two. In particular, they both look to be sort of like a turban, as it would appear in the Orientalist imagination, as you can see on the picture that's now on your screen. The critical point here is that it covers the entire head. This is not just the standard, let's say, popular imagination, but it's actually the opinion of Rashi and other very important Meforshim, particularly the idea that the mitznefet covers the entire head, and I'm sure they were thinking about Jewish norms, let's just call it, even if it's not a strict halakha, that men and women should always have their head covered, especially when they're engaged in worship, in prayer, and in the synagogue. But in this connection, I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about the particular interpretation of Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nahmanides, the great 13th century scholar, communal leader, biblical exegete, halachist, very, very creative thinker, and a very, very sharp, incisive, and precise student of Tanakh. He has an opinion which is not, as far as I know, widely appreciated, though some have looked at it and understood what he's saying, which is that the mitznefet is not a hat. Doesn't cover the head. It's more like a headband. It's 16 amot long, 16 cubits long. That's about 16 yards. It's over 50 feet long, which is wrapped around the head, but leaving the top of that exposed, as you see in this picture, which is what I found for what's called a men's turban, which is used today for people in sports or for looks. But according to the Ramban, this was, this is the general idea, not of course the precise way the mitznefet of the Kohen Gadol looks. He has some very important reasons to back this up from the Torah. For example, he says that the head covering of the ordinary priest is called mikbat, and it's called mitznefet. Mikbat meaning kova, meaning a hat, something that covers the top of the head, and mitznefet being something that's pressed to the side of the head. But the headgear of the high priest is called only mitznefet. It's never called mikbat. It's not. It only goes around the head. It doesn't cover the top of the head. And the proof which seals that this is actually the Ramban's opinion and something that he thinks is backed up by the Torah comes a little later in the Parsha. In Perek Kafchet, the Torah talks about introduces the garments. In Perek Kaftet, it talks about the ceremony in which Moshe Rabbeinu inaugurated the Mishkan and the Kelim, including the priestly garments. And in this ceremony, Moshe said to first put the mitznefet on Aaron's head, and then pours oil on his head. Now, if this was the order of things, it would be very hard to understand. They would pour oil on the turban, on the hat, on the headgear. So the Ibn Ezra says, well, these verses must be out of order, even though in the order the Torah presents it, Moshe first puts the hat on Aaron's head and then pours oil on his head. But it was actually done in the reverse order, otherwise it makes no sense. The Ramban says, no, we have to pay attention to the order in which the Torah presents things. And it was done exactly as the Torah says. He first put the mitznefet and then anointed Aaron with oil. But since the mitznefet left the top of the head bare, then there's no reason why there should be any problem with these verses. And he says explicitly, and I have it here on the screen, Avol nachon shoitat snifa saviv v'emtza rosh meguleh. The middle part of the head, the top of the skull, was meguleh, was bareheaded. V'alav yisak hashemen. So this is an extremely interesting thing and sort of almost counterintuitive to present-day Jews that even though we all cover our heads in davening and cover our heads, even like say Reform Jews will cover their heads or put on a yarmulke at certain events, but the high priest at the height of the Yom Kippur service, when he was wearing this full set of full complement of 8 Bigdei Kahuna, was bareheaded as he was when he was first anointed. This is an extremely unusual interpretation, which fits the verses. And the question is there any deeper meaning to it beyond simply being, as the Rambam would say, a more accurate reading of what the Torah says? Well, I have no definite answer. It's clear that the Ramban finds a very deep meaning to the Bigdei Kahuna, something which fits his Kabbalah, and I emphasize his Kabbalah, which is a very unique type of Kabbalah. It's not something that one can say, it's exactly what the Zohar says. One should be very careful of this. The Ramban's Kabbalah is different. I think it's based on a much more ancient Jewish mysticism, if you wish, or a perception of how the divinity works. But he makes it clear that when the Torah says that the Bigdei Kahuna, the priestly garments, are the kavod l'tifaret, it doesn't mean just for glory to have like these beautiful, glorious garments. He takes the kavod l'tifaret in a specific, one could say, technical sense, as the Zohar does. Tiferet, we can easily link to what's the Sphira called Tiferet, and Kavod, the Ramban calls it Atara, the Zohar calls it Malchut. Whether or not it's the same thing, maybe in the diagrams of the tree of the Sphirot, they have the same thing. But again, what these things mean as manifestations of the deity or hypostases or whatever they may possibly be, I would think that the Ramban's views are particular to him. But he doesn't say exactly what this means with regard to the specific case of the mitznefet, and whether this has any connection to a specific commandment or reason that the Kohen Gadol's head should be bare. I can only suspect the Ramban, the idea of the union of these two sphirot, of these two entities called Kavod v'Tifaret, that takes place in the Beit HaMikdash and takes place as a result of the Kohanim wearing their garments. I don't think it's symbolic simply, but it's simply making a statement, the way people find the symbolic midrashic meaning in the mitznefet, that it means that one should not be haughty, should be a bal gaiva. I think it's much more, I wouldn't say theurgical, I don't like using these words, I'm not sure that's exactly what it means, but it has to do with the actual union that takes place in the Beit HaMikdash between Kavod and Tifaret in the building, and perhaps in the persons of the Kohanim as when they wear their garments. And perhaps there is some, what they would call inyan, some interest that the head of the Kohen Gadol, who is standing upright in the Beit HaMikdash, and his head is perhaps lined up with the Yerushalayim Shomala, should not have any mechitza, should not be any barrier, even a piece of cloth, that it should be some direct connection. This is just my own wild speculation. I haven't found any of the Meforshim of the Ramban who have come up with anything that the substantive that I found. Said the Ramban's Kabbalah, he felt that sod means sod. He didn't say any more than he felt was absolutely necessary. Could only be tantalized by his very interesting understanding of the B'kei Kuna and the Mitznefet of the Kohen Gadol. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for watching.